everyone, and welcome to this session. As Mallory mentioned, we're going to be looking at how we can incorporate a gender lens to entrepreneur support, and we're going to be looking at some tools and existing frameworks for action. So we know that this is the very last session of both the Sankalp and the ANDE Metrics conference. It's also, I'm sure, the end of a very big week for everyone, and we're nearing the end of a very big year for everyone. So we're really, really appreciative for every one of you to be here, to show up for this last session, and to participate in this important discussion around applying a gender lens to entrepreneur support, and more specifically in incorporating gender in monitoring and evaluation. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you've done this in other conference sessions, but if you can change your name to your name and organization, that can make it easier for us to engage with you. Also, if you can use video, we encourage you to, and we also ask that you please mute yourself when you're not contributing, but we do encourage you to ask questions through the chat or by coming off mute, and we will also let you know recording this session. So if you do have any challenges with that, please let us know via the chat. So the session today will start with some introductions, and then we will set the context for today's discussion with two presentations where we will introduce you to two very useful resources that have been developed over the past couple of years to support accelerators and incubators to consider gender within our work and to advance gender equality. If you don't work for or with an accelerator or incubator, please do not worry. We believe that it is really important for accelerators and incubators to work closely with other ecosystem actors. So if you're an investor, a funder, an advisor, a mentor, anyone else really, we think that it's super important for everyone to find alignment in the metrics that we all use to measure how our work contributes towards advancing gender equality, so that we can all together track a collective effort towards advancing gender equality through all of our work in this entrepreneurial ecosystem that we operate in. So there will be plenty of opportunities for you to engage with our content today and the discussion, even if you're not an accelerator or incubator. After the presentations, we will have potentially, depending on timing, we might have a couple of minutes for Q&A, and then we will go and do a breakout exercise where we will get all of you to share what you currently measure when it relates to gender, what you'd ideally, if you had a magic wand, would like to measure when it comes to gender, and how we can potentially get there. So before we kick off with introducing the host for this session with a little bit more depth, we'd love to do a poll to understand who's in this virtual room with us today. And so we're going to get Aditi. Oh, great. There's a poll that would have popped up on your screen. There's just 3 questions: where you're from, what kind of ecosystem stakeholder you are, and what is your interest in this session. So if we can ask you to go ahead and fill out this poll, we'll give you a minute or two to just tick through these options and then to submit it. And then once we have most people who have submitted it, we will have a quick look at those results and see who's with us today for this last session. And then we'll go to introductions. So I'll let Aditi let us know when most people have responded. Awesome. So we've got some results in. We've got quite a spread with participants from Africa leading the charge, which is great. A lot of different time zones, so appreciate that. And we have a lot of impact measurement, monitoring and evaluation experts, which shouldn't be a surprise given this is the ANDE Metrics Conference. We also have intermediaries, which is great, funders, some gender experts, some small and growing businesses, and some others. So interesting to see what those other organizations are. And then interest in the session, again, a bit of a spread with wanting to learn more about both gender equality and its measurement in your work. So we really hope that we can address your interest in this session today, but we will also have our contacts we can only go through so much of our work today. So we will also have our contacts at the end of this presentation in case you did want to reach out and talk further on what we're going to present on today or any of the discussions that we're going to be having. So now we're just going to introduce the host, and then we will go straight into some presentations on these resources that I mentioned, and then we will go into our discussion. So if we just go to the next slide, We're just going to introduce ourselves at YGAP. So my name is Audrey and I'm a program director at YGAP. We are an international development nonprofit that supports early stage social impact ventures with locally led solutions to local problems. We work with ventures across Africa, Asia, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. And to date, we've run about 48 accelerator programs and supported 552 impact ventures that have themselves gone on to help over 1,200,000 people lift themselves out of poverty and disadvantage. And we also have Hedda, who is our male officer on the call. She might wave if people are seeing videos. We'll hear from her in a little bit. 54% of our ventures are women-led. And so we're really, really passionate about providing an equal platform for women-led ventures to launch and grow their social ventures. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we go through the tool that we developed. At YGAP, we not only work with or directly with the entrepreneurs, we're also very deliberate about forming collaborations to support the development of accessible, inclusive, and equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems. And the work we're going to present today within kind of that bucket. And we do this by partnering with governments, foundations, investors, private sector organizations, and other entrepreneur support organizations to tackle barriers that exist to social entrepreneurship. So if you want to find out more about our work or explore how we can work together, we'll again have our contacts at the end of the presentation. But without further ado, we're going to pass the microphone over to Impact Hub, who are going to introduce themselves and are going to introduce us to a really awesome guide that they developed over the last couple of years. So over to you, Justin and Maria.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Maria Trindade. I'm the Impact Hub Global Development Director, and I'm here with Justin, who is our Global Programs and Measurement Lead. We are here to present our guide that we developed. It's an immense pleasure to be here representing the Impact Hub Network, and my colleague Sarah Nichols, who was the leader of this research and is our director for impact and research at Impact Hub Network, but that couldn't be here because of the time zone constraint. This guide that we will present, Accelerator as a Drivers of Gender Equality and a Guide to Gender Lenses in Acceleration, is a result of a research done in the Latin America region that was funded by ANDE and the Canadian International Development Center. You can pass to the next slide. Yes. For those of you who don't know Impact Hub, we are a global network that provides support for social entrepreneurs from space and capacity building to network access to capital and knowledge. We are present in 100 locations across the globe with 6,500 members. We run almost 300 acceleration programs annually. And we have been exploring accessibility in many directions, and gender is one of them. A starting point of our research was that we see gender gap not only in entrepreneurship, but also in the accelerators itself. Only 13% of the applications in acceleration programs are women-led enterprises, against 52%, against 52% of men-led teams. This means that women entrepreneurs are less likely to benefit of all the work that accelerators do, from getting business skills to access to network, investments, and everything else. The ecosystem, we saw accelerators either running specific women-led programs or ignore the gender gap. Our research question once was, how SBG accelerators apply a gender lenses to program and measurement activities and become drivers of gender equality in the SGB sector. SGB sector standing for small growing business. We conducted a qualitative and a quantitative research. The quantitative research was led by Inkai Business School and analyzed a data set of 70 enterprises from many countries in Latin America. And a qualitative research led by Impact Hub that conducted semi-structured interview with 28 women entrepreneurs and 11 accelerate leads. We identified multiple barriers for women in entrepreneurship in Latin America. Gender gap in STEAM education, STEAM standing for science, technology, engineering, and math. Gender different in business sectors, so women are less unlikely to be leading high growth business industries like tech. A gender-based discrimination and harassment, gender gap in access to resource, capital, business support, such as acceleration, lack of confidence and imposter syndrome, and challenge of balanced motherhood and entrepreneurship. That all very evident in all the testimony that you can see on the guides um, and also the data set. The consequences of these barriers um, is that women are more likely to be stuck on the early stage phases of the business development. And the evidence comes from their business having like lower, being younger, having lower margins, lower annual revenue. And these challenges get further compounded by factors such as economic status, education, race, and more. And we know that women from low-income backgrounds are most likely to start business out of necessity than vocation, and have even less access to information resources and face even more substantial challenge in growing their business. To overcome some of the challenges, our research showed we developed a guide to gender lenses in acceleration, covering all the stages of a program setup. That's Justin, our impact measurement and evaluation specialist, and a crucial member of this team that put this research together, will be showing you now.
Okay. Okay, I hope you can hear me. So yeah, nice to be here with you. I'm Justin, Global Programs Measurement Lead from Impact Hub. Yeah, so as Maria said, the guide is comprehensive about gender lens acceleration, but I'm going to talk to you particularly about measurement. Okay, so if you want to measure and understand how effectively you're supporting women entrepreneurs, you need to make a strategic commitment. It requires first and foremost a strategic commitment to making the programs gender inclusive. It's important to define a gender lens specific theory of change, including targets for gender equity and outcomes and integration of metrics in a standard measurement process. Collecting data and disaggregating data by gender and or gender makeup of the founding team. And it's important to analyze data to identify gender gaps and inform program design, learning and evaluation. Here, for those of you who may be less familiar with what an accelerator is, this is the standard theory of change from the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative. And I would just draw your attention to the left-hand side, the stages. There's pre-program, during the program, first year of, after the program, second year after the program, and 5 years post-program. And so at each of those stages, there would be specific things that you're interested in order to be gender, to have a gender lens and be inclusive. So initially, of course, in the pre-program, you're conducting selection. And so there you're interested in things like the cohort being inclusive, including gender. Then during the program itself, you're looking at things like the mentors that people have access to, the entrepreneurs, improvements in business skills, increases in self-confidence. And so this is where the disaggregation by gender would be important to understand if the female participants are having the same or better success rates than the men in those areas. And similarly, after the program, you would be interested in things like commercial partnerships, an increase in financing, and survival of the venture and revenue growth, and how many staff or employees the venture has. And these are things where, again, you'd want to be comparing the outcomes of the women entrepreneurs and the men entrepreneurs and see how well you're actually enabling the entrepreneurs to succeed. Yeah, and then 5 years after the program, you're looking more at these larger outcomes for society, which would not be so much within the scope of an individual program measurement, but would be rather the wider impact, which I'm sure you're all familiar with as M&E experts. Okay, so yeah, the guide includes one section about measurement of entrepreneur support, with a kind of catalogue of metrics which you can use. So we hope this really makes it easy for you to find a simple approach that fits your own needs based on a kind of a list of options, really. Okay, so here are some sample output and process objectives and indicators for the application and selection of ventures onto your accelerator program. So you would have the objective of increasing the number of women entrepreneurs and or women-led ventures applying and being selected into programs. And if you want to measure that, then you would probably want to look at the number of women applicants and how many of those were selected, the number of women-led ventures applying and how many were selected, number of ventures applying and being selected with how many women in the founding team, and the ratio in comparison to male entrepreneurs. So that's just to give one focus on the selection process. I won't go into all of the detail, but the next section there talks about kind of running the promotion and scouting and application process, and you've got a list of useful indicators. And then following that, implementing a gender inclusive selection process as well. You have indicators to look for there. So yeah, as we said, these are output indicators. Okay, and then we continue. So we could also be looking at increasing the number of women entrepreneurs and or women-led ventures participating in and completing the program. And so here you have a list of indicators related to that. Thereafter, you'd be interested in delivering a gender inclusive program. And that's looking at aspects like how many women mentors are there, whether there has been a gender bias training, for example, and others. I won't go through all of them. As Maria mentioned, we will be sharing the link to the guide, and we very much hope that you'll look into that in depth for yourselves and take what you need. And so that's why I'm not going into every detail here. Okay, and finally, increase the overall visibility and credibility of women in entrepreneurship. And there are some indicators related to that. Okay, so now we're moving from the output level to the outcome level, which, as you know, as M&E experts, is where we look at changes, really valuable changes for the stakeholders that we're dealing with, especially the women entrepreneurs. So some of the key ones would be increasing confidence of those women entrepreneurs, their business confidence, that they believe that they can succeed in the business, increasing their access to mentors and expanded business networks, increasing their business skills, and ventures successfully accessing financing. So for all of those, you're going to be looking at how the women entrepreneurs are benefiting from the program in comparison to the men, especially. Okay, then some more. We have increase in the revenue of the venture, how many staff. You can see that these things relate back to that Gali theory of change I showed you before. These were some of those outcomes for the post-program phase. Ventures applying to a gender lens to their own business operations. So this one's quite interesting. So the number of ventures that have actually done a gender lens assessment of their own business, number of ventures offering products or services that improve the lives of women and girls. So here you see that we've moved from the level of the accelerator to the level of the supported venture, and to see how gender is being operationalized by them. Okay, and then ventures promote workplace equity. Yes, okay, so that's those. So hopefully that gives you just a taster of what you can hope for from the guide. As I say, it's packed with useful information and indicators. So going forward, our plans basically, this is a very important topic at Impact Hub, and it's a shame that Sarah can't be here today to present it herself, and I'm representing her. But we are certainly going to take this forward, and we'll do that by further research on entrepreneurship acceleration and support needs of women entrepreneurs in other regions, so not just in Latin America where this research was focused, and also on capacity building for accelerators and entrepreneur support providers in gender lens programs management and measurement, and specific research and initiatives and funding for the SGB ecosystem, small and growing business ecosystem, to better support women entrepreneurs to move from early stage to investable high-scale ventures. So hopefully that's attracting your attention. And if any of that appeals to you, we hope you'll get in touch with us at Impact Hub to keep the discussion going forward. Okay, so here is the link. If you want to download the guide, it's available for you now, genderlensacceleration.impacthub.net. And if you have questions, then you can reach out to Sarah at that email below. She's our research director, a research and impact director. So she authored the guide and will be able to answer your questions and work with you on future collaborations and such things. So we really hope that you'll do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. If you can stop sharing your screen, I will share mine in a second. Thank you for sharing your guide with us, both you and Maria. So before we jump into our resource that we developed, which is very, very complementary to the guide that was just presented, just wanted to take a little step back and share YGAP's interest in advancing gender equality and why we engaged in a similar process of developing a toolkit as well for accelerators and incubators. So we've been working with women entrepreneurs, or just entrepreneurs in general, for 12 years, and we've firsthand observed the barriers that they face, very similar to those that Maria shared earlier in her presentation. So the world of entrepreneurship and investment is still not equal for all genders, and as a result, we're really not benefiting from the full potential of the world's entrepreneurs. And so we really believe at YGAP that contributing towards achieving gender equality, diversity, and inclusion is important for us as accelerators and incubators, and as entrepreneurial ecosystem actors more broadly, not only because gender equality is a fundamental human right, but because we believe that it can really help us achieve, through entrepreneurship, sustainable development, vibrant economies, and peaceful societies. So we believe that better incorporating gender within monitoring and evaluation systems, which is what we've been looking at and what Justin kind of just spoke about, is crucial for us to be able to move beyond, I guess, just quantifying and counting the inclusion of women. Outputs is important and it gives us some information, but as he kind of went on and talked about outcomes, we really want to move towards measuring progress brought about through strategies that actually aim to achieve gender equitable change. So we believe that everyone in this virtual room today holds some kind of power, whether it's funding, whether you're a measurement expert that kind of decides what to track and how to use that information, whether you're running a program to connect entrepreneurs with funding sources or mentorship or advisors, we all hold some kind of power to be able to advance gender equality through our work. So it's great to be able to measure that. We're just going to be sharing our toolkit, our complementary resource. So just sharing my screen now. So in 2019, we developed and extensively tested an interactive toolkit. It's called the Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit. We've got the URL there, but as Mallory just put in the chat, we will also be sharing these slides with you, and Heda's just about to send the link to this toolkit in the chat as well. It was developed in partnership with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, which is a private foundation out of Japan, and with the Australian government as well. It was launched at AVPN earlier this year, and it's a collection of practical tools, strategies, and real-world case studies to support accelerators and incubators in making our work more accessible, inclusive, and equitable for all genders. So I'm going to do something that is never recommended on a presentation and do a short demo. It's going to be the elevator pitch version of a demo of this resource, just because I know that we have all been staring at slides for a little while and probably all day. So I thought this could be a little more interactive, and let's see how this goes. I'm just going to share this resource. So this is a toolkit. I'm going to give you the really quick overview of it. It is an interactive resource. It has some introduction pages that talks about why we should consider gender within our work. And then it looks at 3 sections. So how we can apply and consider gender within our organizations, in our cultures, in our structures, in our operations, how we can consider gender within our programs, very similar to the guide that was just presented as well. So going through the whole life cycle of an incubator or accelerator, from selecting entrepreneurs all the way to managing alumni ventures, and then how we can actually advocate for gender equality throughout the whole ecosystem. So I'm just going to skip through, but what I'm going to show is this kind of modular content page where you can jump into and essentially navigate through the different parts of your organization, program, or ecosystem that you want to apply your gender lens to, and navigate through sections and subsections. And if I give you an example within organization, if you did want to apply gender lens to your culture and more specifically to values and policies, you can navigate to that page, and it provides you with some strategies for how you might be able to do that, which you obviously need to contextualize to your world, but also with some frameworks and examples of such strategies as well. So that can be really helpful. Those examples and frameworks were pulled from our research, but also some of them were created along with the rest of the content. If you're not an accelerator or incubator on this call, we would argue, and the feedback we've gotten is the organization section is very applicable to any kind of organization, because it is very much, you know, if you have a team, if you have a culture, if you have values and policies, some of these strategies will be helpful. So hopefully you can also jump in there and make use of this tool. We also have in the ecosystem section how accelerators and incubators can support mentors, funders, and investors and governments in terms of advocating for gender equality. And so if you're one of those stakeholders, that might be useful as well for you. And last feature that I will show is just on the case studies. So we did test this with accelerators and incubators, and you might recognize some of them in here. And so they've got their little case study and journey of testing and helping to develop this toolkit. We wanted to make sure that it is highly contextualizable, practical, applicable to all contexts. So that's just a very quick overview of this resource that I wanted to share with you. It's very similar to the guide. It kind of complements it and refers to it as well. So I would encourage you to go to both of those resources and kind of pick and choose the parts that make the most sense for you and your organization. But outside of that, what we wanted to share with you today is that we are actually expanding on this toolkit this year. We've repartnered with the Sasaka Peace Foundation, and we're actually growing this toolkit to include content that will guide accelerators and incubators through the process of measuring the impact of the strategies that they put in place to advance gender equality. So the strategies that we just showed you that are part of the toolkit, so they will be measurements, and very similar, and it actually does refer to the Impact Hub measures as well. So it will be kind of a combination of those and other ones that we found through our research, but essentially will help again to think through some of the indicators, both quantitative and qualitative, that you might be able to use to try to measure the impact of all of these strategies that you're putting in place, and making sure that they are having an impact, whether it's on your business or an impact in terms of social impact. And that you also know, I guess, if they're having negative consequences and unintended consequences, which is always an important part of measurement as well. So Hedda now is going to take us through the research that we performed. So we performed a bit of research, best practice research, at the start of developing this new content, which is currently in pilot phase. And she's just going to share some of the insights that we found from that research, which will kind of complement, and I'm sure that Impact Hub went through some similar process when they did the development of that content around some of the key insights that we discovered when it comes to measurement and gender. So over to you, Hedda.
Thanks, Audrey. So during this phase, we did quite a few in-depth interviews with about 10 key organizations that are working in the gender lens measurement and entrepreneurship space. So we spoke to people like Criterion, Gali, Value for Women, and Nest as well, which I see someone from Nest is actually on our session today, which is great. And besides speaking to these organizations, we also did some kind of desktop research and reviewed the standard metrics that already exist. So as you well know, IRIS, the GuideStar, the B Labs, the SDGs of the world. And we looked at some other guides to see how people are already currently measuring gender equality in their work. Again, especially in the acceleration and incubation kind of space, as well as within their own organizations. After that, we also then performed a needs assessment more broadly, so to try to understand whether incubators and accelerators currently consider gender within their own monitoring and evaluation systems. And so some of the findings or key themes that we discovered throughout this process was that probably not super surprising to most of us that are in M&E, but that very few organizations are actually measuring beyond outputs when it comes to gender. We recognize that it's challenging to measure the outcomes that we're aiming for, things like kind of increased confidence or empowerment, inclusion, belonging, which then leads to the second point, which is that there is a need for more qualitative data. So currently the metrics are highly focused on that kind of quantitative, that counting of representation, retention, but it doesn't really show us how people feel about their experience. So whether all genders feel empowered or have a sense of belonging in their workplace, for example. So again, you know, we know that this is challenging, and it just becomes even more challenging when we start thinking about gender in different contexts and different languages, and then as well as when we start thinking about the intersectionality of gender. So when we start thinking about race on top of that and sexual identity. This then also leads us to this need for kind of local and organizational contextualization. And even though, yes, there are a lot of kind of standardized indicators out there, and they're a great starting point, but different business models and different geographic locations will require different metrics. So not everything is really kind of easily captured in that standardized kind of system. And besides that, we also see that even though there's a lot of research that is showing the benefits of gender diversity in large organizations, so, you know, we know about kind of the improved financial performance, better designed products and services, there's still currently a lack of data and strong evidence to support the business case for the benefits of supporting gender equality through acceleration, but also in SGBs. So how do we go about building that business case? Besides this lack of data, there's also a lack of tools that exist to address implicit gender bias. Now, we know that everyone has bias, and this can affect, you know, who receives more investment, who receives better mentorship, but this bias is often implicit and it's hard to identify and then address. And so the last point we've just got here is that there's also a lack of resources and capacity of accelerators and incubators to consider gender more deliberately within their own work, as well as then also to provide the support to their SGBs to consider gender in their work. And this extends out to monitoring evaluation. A very common theme that we hear, I think, is that, you know, there's not enough capacity to measure everything that we want to measure. And so then we need to be really selective about what we do measure. So these findings kind of set us on our way to collating kind of existing indicators to measure progress towards gender equality. And we also then started designing kind of additional, more qualitative indicators that might help measure gender inclusion, which is now currently being tested with our pilot. And I'll just let Audrey speak a bit more about that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Hedda. The other thing that, I mean, I guess we talked about some of the gaps or challenges that we identified through that research, but we also spoke to a lot of those organizations that are making that are taking real steps towards creating measurement tools or just tools in general. We've heard of scorecards, surveys, all these different kind of indicators that are being developed and tested to try to make progress towards building that business case for advancing gender equality through all of our work. So it was very encouraging on the flip side to hear about all of the work that's currently in the process of being developed that will be available to everyone in the next couple of years. So in terms of, we took that research and those learnings, and we actually, as Hedda mentioned, ended up creating some content. So part of the content is going to be a whole new section to that toolkit, which is going to be just concrete steps for accelerators and incubators to be able to integrate gender within their monitoring and evaluation systems, from collection all the way to using the data for decision making. And then we're also creating a list of quantitative as well as qualitative indicators that organization can use to measure the effectiveness of the strategies that they're using to advance gender equality. We are currently piloting this content, and that's why it wasn't available in the publicly available version of the toolkit. We're piloting it with 9 really great organizations that are at Southeast Asia. You might recognize some of them. So they're currently helping us to pilot it and to make sure, again, going back to some of those challenges that we found around capacity, around what makes a certain context for certain languages when you go rural versus urban. We're really trying to test some of the content that we've developed to make sure that it's really practical, applicable, and actually helps to measure what we're trying to measure. So this new content is currently being piloted. It will be published and released in early 2021. So hopefully we can share it out and share it through the ANDE network at that stage as well, so that everyone can get access to it. But that's pretty much it. What I will say, if similar to what Justin and Maria mentioned, we really are happy to communicate and collaborate with anyone that's really interested in the work that we're doing. We are currently building a bit of a community of practice around this topic, and would love to discuss this with anyone who wants to be involved or wants to find out more about it. These are contact details. I think Mallory is going to share the slides, so don't worry if you're not capturing everyone's contact details. They will also be available in the very last slide. But now that we've done all of our presentation, I'm just going to check the time. We're actually making really good time. So we do have a bit of time for some Q&A. If anyone has questions to anyone who's just presented, questions around the guides, around potential collaboration opportunities, metrics, anything, please feel free to come off mute or to pop them in the chat and we can address them now. We'll give you a couple of minutes. If not, that's completely fine. You can also pop them into the chat at any point and we can start kind of going towards the next activity. Any questions? No? All right, that's completely fair. It is Friday after all, I think, for most of us on this call, so can't blame you for that. If you did want to come off mute or put anything on the chat at any point, please do go ahead. I can see one more message. Oh, no worries, Renata. Thank you for your contribution as well. We talked to your team as part of the research. So what we're going to do next is we're going to jump into a breakout exercise.
Audrey?
Yes. No.
Sorry, Suchi here, but there's a question at the end of Renata's comment, which is about wanting to share a little more about the community of practice. And the reason I'm calling that out is it's selfish. I'd like to hear a little bit more as well, please.
Sounds good. And thanks for pointing that out. I am one to read half of comments, which is really bad habit that I have. So really appreciate that. So just in terms of the community of practice, as I mentioned on that on that previous slide, we do have, we've been working with accelerators and incubators, both as part of our research, but also as part of piloting and developing the content. And as part of both our research and as part of this piloting and capacity building services that we've been, or capacity building programs we've been running with accelerators and incubators, there's been a real interest to continue to come together and share with one another what is working and what isn't working in terms of advancing gender equality through acceleration and incubation, especially because this is all an evolving field. So we're all getting more knowledge about this every single day. And so it's really important to be able to learn from one another and to learn about what's worked and what hasn't worked and to try that across different contexts. So we've just found through our best practice research, as well as through our pilots, that people have expressed interest in coming together in a more formal way. We don't know yet what that could look like, because communities of practice, there's some that have been really well in the world, and there's some that haven't kind of gained as much momentum as they could have. So I think we're exploring models for that at the moment. If you have any ideas around what that could look like, please feel free to reach out. Happy to have conversations. We're currently exploring how we can build on the 14 or so organizations that we've been actively working with to expand that more broadly and get more people and organizations to benefit from that engagement and the sharing that's happening in kind of applying a gender lens in acceleration and incubation. So please, if you have any ideas, please do follow up with us. Otherwise, happy also to be connected. And as we're coming up with those concepts around how we might build this community of practice, happy to share that as well and get feedback from you on whether that's something you would want to engage in. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. Awesome. If there's any other questions, or if I miss any questions in the chat, please call me out on that. I have a habit of doing that. Otherwise, we will now go over to the breakout session. So essentially what's going to happen now is we're going to break out into some Zoom breakout rooms, which I'm sure everyone is very, very familiar with now with all the online virtual conferences we've been participating in this year. And what we're going to do is just discuss 3 questions. Very simple. Essentially, regardless of what kind of stakeholder you are in the ecosystem, how do you currently capture and use data to enhance gender equality through your work? So what do you currently capture? Do you just capture normal data and then disaggregate it by gender? Do you have specific gender metrics that you use, that you've tried, that have worked, that haven't worked? What are you currently doing, capturing and using in terms of kind of gender metrics, gender indicators, or any kind of data to enhance gender equality? The second question is, if you had a magic wand, what would you be capturing and using in terms of data? So obviously we mentioned that there's some data that is harder to capture. I would love to be able to measure gender inclusion in depth in some of the contexts that we work in, but we recognize that that's quite challenging. So we haven't quite got there yet, but that's kind of, if we had a magic wand, we would be able to like know how inclusive our programs are for all of our entrepreneurs that we work with. And then the third question is, how do we get to that ideal way of capturing and using data to enhance gender equality? So do we have any ideas around whether, you know, community of practice would be really useful, a standardized kind of framework would be really useful for kind of all in the ecosystems to collaborate and work on and collectively build that business case for gender equality. So what could we be doing to essentially start capturing and using that data to enhance gender equality? So just 3 questions, which we're going to pop, which Mallory has already popped into the chat, which should be carried over to your breakout sessions. Normally you will have one of us in those sessions with you if you did have any extra questions, but if you don't, if you happen to be in a session without us, a breakout session without us, please do take notes, and then we'll regroup, and we'd love for some of you to share any insights that have come out of those sessions. So I think I'm going to pause there. If there's any questions, please let us know, and then we'll get Aditi to put us into some rooms, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you for the great participation in the breakout rooms. I think that everybody's back in here. So Audrey, I'll give it back over to you, I think.
It's back to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Maria.
No, we would like to hear from the group, like the main insights that you guys have in the group. If someone from each group could share.
Hi, yeah, I can report back from our group, Maria. We had a really interesting discussion, and it was clear immediately that each of the participants in the group was very kind of passionate about this topic, some kind of focusing on different aspects, some already deeper into it, some a little bit newer, but let me share a few of the insights that we heard. So we heard particularly from Matt from ONOW, that they do focus on supporting women entrepreneurs, and for them it's particularly important to consider every step in the journey of the entrepreneur as a user journey, and think about disaggregating the data for the women versus the men of each step. So I thought that was great to have that kind of clarity, that you look at each step of the process, and then you look at the results at each stage and see what changes you would need to make it more equitable for the women. Also identifying the most important touch points. And so he gave the example of having different types of advertisement and doing a kind of control trial approach, where you present one advertisement with women prominent in the image, and another one perhaps in a different style, and see which is the most effective, and based on the results, sort of in a scientific way, then adjust your approach to recruitment via that. Pei Shan from Village Capital had a very interesting point that was focusing on capital raised as the metric. So he said, okay, we're going to compare the application stage capital raised of the entrepreneur with the post-program capital raised. And we're going to compare that for men and women and see how the performance differs. And I thought that was really interesting as a strong focus on the outcomes. And that's really one of the most telling results, is whether they've had a difference in raising the capital. In terms of the kind of aspiration of where people would like to get to, Renee had a very exciting point there, which was basically thinking about which components of support you're offering. So, you know, making a very refined theory of change, basically, by saying, all right, we offer if we offer mentoring or peer learning opportunities or large group support or small group support, which of those models of support is actually most effective? Which combination of support services is the most effective? And so I thought that was a really good insight. Yeah, and the aspiration, or kind of the barrier, and what needs to happen next. The key points there were really keeping the burden low for entrepreneurs themselves. So how can we measure this but not continuously survey and have this kind of survey fatigue with the busy entrepreneurs? But also, how can we develop really crisp indicators that capture what we need to know in a really concise way and are clear? And I think the guides that we've presented already go a good way in that direction. So yeah, it was a great discussion, and I hand back to you, Maria.
Thank you, Justin. Any other group who wants to share, or anyone who wants to share some of the insights and great learnings or important exchange?
Anyone from my group? We had a really great conversation as well, so much so that we didn't quite get through the questions. Anyone from the group that I was in want to jump in? Happy to do a little summary. Otherwise,
Audrey, could you move a little closer? We can't really hear you quite well.
Sorry. I'm happy to, if anyone else wants to jump in from my group, happy to. Otherwise, I'll do a quick summary of some of the highlights. So there was different types of stakeholders in the group, and a lot of them were looking at kind of quantitative data still. And there was a question around, as entrepreneur support organizations and stakeholders in the ecosystem, are we really walking the talk? And are we as organizations looking internally at our organizations and looking at what we could do internally, whether it's our policies, our values, our culture, our teams, to advance gender equality through that? So as much as we want to kind of support SGBs to do it, are we doing it ourselves? Which is important, considering, I guess, we're the ones designing products and services for those SGBs. So ideally, if we want to design these and deliver this for all genders, then we should be represented by all genders as well, and take that into account. There was also a note from Sachi, who works for an impact investing firm, where they currently look more at output than outcomes, but she mentioned that what would be interesting is to try to measure not against a vacuum, but against a larger data set. So again, whatever you're measuring when it comes to gender equality, how can that be pinned again against some data sets that actually you're able to kind of see the data and make sense of it against, you know, other types of larger data sets. So you're not doing it in a vacuum and disaggregating data in a vacuum, and you can have something to compare it to see if it's actually good or bad. And I guess this community of practice, and the more we measure similar metrics, the more we're able to compare, which would be the ideal. And then there was also mention of disaggregating data, but that, you know, as much as that sounds like we keep saying that quantitative metrics or outputs is maybe kind of the first step, and we want to go beyond that, it can be really challenging sometimes to even disaggregate by gender when you look at certain industries. So Tanuja from my group mentioned that I believe it was in agriculture, she was looking at supply chain or beneficiaries within the SGBs that she's working with. And that can be already really hard because women within those supply chains are often invisible. So how do you actually accurately kind of measure or count or represent the gender within that? So it can actually be quite challenging to even just disaggregate beyond looking at inclusion and some of those metrics. And then when we move to the second questions, there was two magic wands. One was around really trying to go towards the depth. How do we actually look at the impact of strategies or programs that try to advance gender equality and have depth in kind of the measurement of those programs and whether they're useful or not. But then the other one was around, actually, can we just start all disaggregating by gender? Because a lot of organizations still don't even do that. So if you're still not looking at your current metrics and data and activities and seeing how that's disaggregating that data, by gender already, that can be a first step that everyone can do to get a better idea of what they're doing. And then from there, we can go into more kind of complex, potentially indicators or measures. And the last one was around transparency about performance. And obviously some people don't report it because either they don't have awareness of what's happening within their organization or their work, or they don't want to report what's happening within their work. So if there's somewhere to encourage transparency in the community and sharing the data and results, we can all learn from that. But obviously we need an incentive or a stick or a carrot for that, I would say. So those were the main insights. We didn't get to the last question. That being said, I think if we are running a bit ahead of time, we might be able to leave a bit of time at the end for anyone who wants to address that last question around what could we do, because we have so many great humans on this call. But that's it for our group, Maria.
Thank you, Audrey. Anyone else from other group who wants to share? Anyone else who wants to share some insight that was important to them? Oh, Cypria.
Yes, happy to share from the group. Maria was in our group, and Renata and the others, please feel free to jump in if you think I'm missing anything. I think most of it was already covered in what Justin and Audrey shared, but just in terms of the data that's being captured right now is again quantitative. Renata shared how at NEST they're capturing data in terms of women founders, board members, the gender split in senior directors and managers also. And I think another point that she added was in the enterprises that they work with, something that they also track is, do they have a policy that protects women in the workplace? And if they do, how do they communicate this with their employees? Is something that they're looking to start tracking. And then in terms of if you had a magic wand, of course, the responses were of the qualitative nature. How can we start looking at if women founders or women are in leadership roles, what impact does that have on women in the workplace or just in terms of the working atmosphere? Does that change anything? Are women taken less seriously than men in some cases? So that's something that was interesting that came up. Apart from that, of course, in terms of what would be the impact of having a woman as a role model or a mentor, especially in societies that have historically sort of typecast women into certain roles, and what would the impact be of seeing them as leaders, and would that sort of have a positive frame? And then in terms of a slightly negative metric that I think Ruchi said, although I'm not entirely sure if it is a negative metric, it is something that's important to be tracked as well, is how many women are dissuaded from starting companies. What we see are the positive ones who actually have started that journey in terms of wherever they are at in that journey, but were there people who didn't even get to that level of beginning? So that would be something that would be useful to track, so we can address that problem at the very beginning. So yeah, and I think, of course, in terms of, we didn't really get to the last question, but just broadly what came through was beginning at the very least a gender disaggregation, which is not something that is still mandated across data collection, unless it is a delivery that is for women, so to speak, right? Like if it's been designed for that, then that's the level that you collect data, but can we make that sort of a general framework? And then also Renata shared about how you need to start thinking from the perspective of the beneficiary, not just the women entrepreneur, but who is sort of the final recipient of that product or service. So yes, yeah, feel free to jump in if I missed anything, the others from my group, but that was from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sapir. Does anyone else want to add anything from our group? I think there is one more group. Am I right? There was 4 groups.
Yes, that was our group.
Oh, here we go.
Yes, won't repeat what has already been said, but so we do talk about not just collecting on the gender, but also in terms of intersectionality. So actually disaggregating between, what kind of regions that people lived in, and kind of seeing the different points of disadvantage through that. We talked about how we use the data, so to inform program design or the way that we do communications. And something that we actually spent a bit of time talking about was also, I guess, really needing to include, not just kind of women advocating for women, but actually having kind of ambassadors, our kind of male colleagues, and getting involved and advocating for kind of gender equality issues as well. And there was one other thing I just wanted to mention was in terms of, I guess what we would like to be able to measure more is around that kind of, again, that qualitative, that kind of storytelling of the impact on entrepreneurs sometime post support, and also not just the impact that it has on, say, the female-led founders, but also actually their families and the communities around them and how they've been impacted as well, which I thought was an interesting point. Those were my key highlights. I'm not sure. I'm sure I have missed other things. So if anyone else wants to chip in, please feel free.
Anyone else wants to share something? We are getting close to the end, so if there is anything that, any kind of major insight or even a small insight that was for you that you feel that would be important for people to hear. Go on, Carol.
May I come in?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So we spoke about male role models. One of the things that I did speak about and I thought would be very important, if we could have enough male role models, the more males we bring in to talk about female issues, I think that's a metric nobody ever captures. How many males talk about female issues? And I think the more of that we have, I think the more the magic wand will grow wider and wider.
Thank you, Karen. Does anyone else want to share something that you think it's important for this group or any experience?
Maria, I would just throw in one